Imagine what's possible when learning doesn't get in the way of life. At Capella University, our game-changing FlexPath learning format lets you set your own deadline so you can learn at a time and pace that works for you. It's an education you can tailor to your schedule. That means you don't have to put your life on hold to pursue your professional goals. Instead, enjoy learning your way and earn your degree without missing a beat. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
Being a marketer's no sweat. You just have to manage dozens of channels, launch hundreds of campaigns, score thousands of leads, and okay, fine, it's a lot of sweat. Unless you have HubSpot's AI-powered marketing tools to help you do all that and more. Get started at HubSpot.com/marketers.
When it comes to towing, seeing is believing. That's why Chevy Truck's advanced camera technology offers up to 8 available cameras for 14 unique views, so you can focus on the view that really matters. Chevrolet, together let's drive. Learn more about Chevy Trucks at Chevy.com. Safety or driver assistance features are no substitute for the driver's responsibility to operate the vehicle in a safe manner. Read the Vehicle Owner's Manual for important feature limitations and information.
The Musial with Alan and Daniel. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. Everyone come gather round, listen to your favorite sound. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We'll talk the games and all the rest, about the team that we love best. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We're gonna talk about the Cardinals all night long.
Good morning. Welcome into another edition of Meet Me at Musial. I'm your host, Danny Shop at C70. With me, as always, Alan Medlock, A Medlock 1, coming to you Saturday morning. After a fairly quiet week for the Cardinals, after such a, I don't want to say chaotic week, but definitely newsworthy week the week before. The Cardinals are kind of in a bit of a holding pattern. Alan, it doesn't feel like there's much they can do until the World Series wraps up.
It's really laid back with the news that we heard, and then the coaches that we expected to move on last week. You kind of knew it'd be pretty quiet, right now, and unfortunately, I get the feeling that this is how it's going to be most of the offseason, because other than, some headlines that come out of probably research stories, that this may be how the offseason goes completely. Yeah, I wouldn't expect a lot of headline busting news out of them. I don't think they're going to spend the Cardinals. I don't think they're going to spend too much money, and I don't think they're going to make any substantial changes that will be visible. And it's kind of par for the course at this point.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I mean, there are a couple of possibilities of trades, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, maybe. But the idea is they're revamping the minor league system, and the money and the resources and stuff that goes in there is not the exciting stuff, I guess. Not the stuff that usually gets headlines. You don't get a big in-depth thing about this adding scouting directors or minor league coordinators or anything of that nature. When they hire, the actual farm director or the guy that replaces Gary LaRocque type of thing, there'll be some there, but there's a good chance that's not going to be somebody that we have a whole lot of knowledge about, right? I mean, we can read the articles and things of that nature, but it's not like when they go out and sign a pitcher or something that we know about. It's just a guy that may or may not have a track record, may or may not, have experience in that regard. But either way, it's just like, oh, okay, that's kind of cool. But, that's not like there's a whole lot of, we don't follow the inner circle, I guess, of all these major league teams that like we did players, I guess.
Yes. I mean, that's, you're right. It's one of those, I always try to dance around how to explain that, and I may not even be great at doing so, but he just, it's I guess how we put it is we put how the Cardinals are under the microscope, and that's why we do the show. Period. You know what I mean? And the other situations we just don't have necessarily pay much attention to. So I mean, as far as you're right. As far as players that may be moving out, which we may get into later, and this Major League Baseball player movement, as far as the roster movement, there's not a lot that's completely visible unless you're doing this every weekend.
Right. And I know people that are plugged in might find like whoever whatever name comes in as farm director or whatever might find it intriguing, but I think when Heim Bloom was hired originally, nobody knew who he was. Now obviously he's gotten to that stature, but so it's probably going to be an unknown name and very difficult for us less than less than tight end people to talk about. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, you're right. We're used to quiet winners in St. Louis, but it's a little bit different this year, right? Because it's not. I mean, a lot of years we have quiet winners, but we can at least try to talk ourselves into they're going to do this or they're going to do that, or maybe they should do this, or this is the argument for that. There's not any of that right now, except for they should trade players, and that's not exactly the most exciting thing because what you're getting back is going to be hopefully young and exciting talent, but not proven talent.
Yeah, the talent that you won't see, that won't reap benefits for a few years. You're right. You hit the nail on the head on that, and it's that's I think what is going to turn out to be probably the most frustrating part of the offseason. Well, and I don't know if you watched it or not, but Wayno was on foul territory, this week, and made the comment how they won't rebuild in St. Louis because it just wouldn't work. It's the fan base, but you know how he is. He's the rose-colored glasses
That's just true
approach to everything. So you hear those headlines and you're thinking, no, they're not going to bring people in, but they may not move everybody out either. And which may be the case. I don't know. Before diving into what next season may look like, I feel like you need to do your due diligence on the guys that you can't trade out, and that's one of those that's kind of a gut punch approach to it. But yeah, all in all, you're right. I mean, it's one of those that they're never. Last year when we thought, hey, this is going to be that one big push with Goldschmidt going on what will potentially be his last year of his contract, they made the comment of bringing in 3 starters and all that, and we're thinking, oh heck, this is going to be awesome if you can go get Nola. Snell's out there. Snell may not be a fit, but let's go get him. Let's go get the biggest on the market. And they hire and they signed everybody in November, and one of which is a guy I love and has been here before, and that was the exciting winner. And that's kind of status quo with how they've been, and I don't know if that's going to change in the near term, but I think that would be a welcome change if it happens, long term. Back to this winter, that I expect a lot of boredom and a lot of researching and reading articles when they do hire these people.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that what I have gotten, and you can tell me if this kind of goes with what you're thinking. Again, Mo has said, not a rebuild, a reset. And I think to go along with that, it feels to me like he said they were going to have conversation with Sonny Gray and Wilson Contreras and those guys that have no trade clauses and wanted to come to St. Louis. And it really sounded to me less like they want to actively trade these guys. They just can't because of the non-trade. More that they wanted these guys to be content, right? If they want to stay, they're happy to keep them. If they want to move, that they want to accommodate them. But it was not, we've got to try to move these guys and we're going to try to talk them into being traded. Is that naive, or is that what do you think?
No, that's I completely understand, and that's kind of how I had approached it. I think bringing in a guy like a Gray for 1 year, moving him out's bad business. I don't know if that just doesn't look like it, and that I think that a move. Not saying it's not going to happen, but I think a move like that, you do have to put the rebuild moniker on it, and not the reset, and just find a word that's gonna satisfy both sides. The group that wants to blow it up and the group that wants to hang on as long as you want. Which I feel like I fall into that group a little bit of don't white flag it right now. I think that you can bring these guys in. Now, if you do go to an Arenado and he say, hey, I want to make one more push, I feel like you could get somebody pretty quickly. And then, he's a West Coast guy. Those teams have the funds to do it. And you could probably swallow some money, which I also don't think is going to be a popular approach this offseason. The Gray one is the one that gets me a little bit. I mean, the contract also speaks that may be some of the mindset, but I just don't know if that's just the best look, and it almost makes the presser look worse whenever you're moving guys out so quickly. I back to the question. I think that's the approach they'll probably take. Hey, this is where I want to know if the Cardinals come to them and say, we may take a step back this year, but we do feel like the youth is coming. And we want to help with the development of the guys that are close to get over the hump to not regress when they get to the big league level. And maybe that's the selling point to some of these guys, or maybe there's no selling point at all. And it's hey, this is exactly what's going on. And they move everybody. I hope that's not the case. And I hope they can sell them on one to stay.
Yeah. I mean, Nolan's got a contract through 2027. So if you're looking to rebuild in the rebuild, reset, whatever you want to call it, in the 1 to 2 year range, right? If you're talking about a step back for a year, maybe, and then hopefully be at least somewhat, in the competitive nature in 26, Nolan may be saying that's fine, because he's still going to be here for that length, even though he'll be declining. He may want to be a part of that, right? But, a guy like Sonny Gray, whose contract, it's got that option year at the end of it, but it's done at the end of 26. If the club doesn't exercise the option, it's a club option. So they could have him for 27, although apparently he can opt out of it. So it's almost like a mutual thing.
Yeah.
Which is a little bit weird when they just say mutual option, but anyway, I guess it gives the club the first dibs. But anyway, that may be where it's like, hey, by the time this team gets good, I'm going to be gone anyway, so I don't want to sit through all that. But, again, I don't know. I think it's going to be very interesting to see the motivations on these players and if they want to stay, why they want to stay, if they even say why they want to stay. I mean, Sonny Gray, made a point of coming to St. Louis.
Yeah.
And it was, one, of course, the history and the idea that he's going to compete, but he also was coming to a team that had just, won 71 games. And I know he didn't expect, that, but it's also hard for any team to win 20 more games the next year. So, maybe he knew that this was going to be, a process. I think he partly came because it was close to home. And that may be enough pull for him, right? I mean, he's played a lot of different places, and he may know, hey, I'm comfortable here. I don't want to risk it. I want to stay through this time. Or he might say, no, we gotta chase that ring. So I don't think you can fault him either way.
Yeah, it's you're exactly right, and you're right. Finding out the mindset and the motivation on some of these guys in the offseason will tell a lot, And I'm not necessarily saying that in a negative way. It's I don't know. I think that we're in for one of those off season that could be extremely gut punchy by moving guys out. I mean, we haven't even touched on Helsley with the contract, because I think that's malpractice if you don't deal him. And they could look different. I mean, give me your idea of a true tank job, of a true rebuild, because I was sitting here the whole time you were talking, thinking about, well, in other sports, you're doing it to gather draft picks and
right.
and go that route, which doesn't necessarily exist in baseball per se. And then, on my side, it's you're playing guys out into arbitration, moving them, and then you're building from the top to where you get your best. You maximize getting these guys here quickly, so you get full value up until arbitration, to where you feel like it's time to move on or resign and go that direction. Is that similar to how you think of it?
Yeah, I think so. I think if you were going to do a complete rebuild, you would have to you'd go actively trying to trade all four of these guys that we've
Yeah.
kind of had in mind, plus Helsley, um, and find. I think even you're looking at trading Mats. You're looking at finding. You may even eat some money to trade Michaelis just so you can have the
Mhm.
roster spot. And you're starting a team next year that's what average of 25, 26 years old. Both in the in the lineup and the rotation. I think you and, granted, where the Cardinals are at, it might not be a huge change if they did all that,
Yeah.
trading off any kind of big. I think we would notice it most of the pitching staff because as much as I mean, they'd have to go out and find some sort of veteran somewhere.
Yeah.
I think, because you could have a rotation. If you did that complete tear down. I mean, Andre Palante is your opening day starter, and I don't know who the four are after him, right?
Yeah.
Quinn Matthews gets a jump up, and you hope that Graceffo and Kloffenstein are ready, and maybe Drew Rom's healthy, and I mean that could be a very rough rotation. So I don't, but if you're going to go full Houston, full Chicago, that's probably what you do, right?
Sure.
I don't, I just don't. That's not in. Then I think that's where Wainwright was coming from, as
Yeah.
well. In that you can't tear it down and expect to be good in 5 years in St. Louis. A 1 or 2 year kind of reboot. Yeah, I think you can get people, but after that, it comes. I don't think people are ready for that kind of thing.
No, agreed, agreed. And a lot of times those don't work. You know what I mean? And I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
you would, I think that you could poll the people in Baltimore right now. And I think there's some sore feelings about how things have worked out,
Mhm.
in the new ownership group. I mean, that I think that you could, I think that that's how it works. Now, here's another question I thought about while you were talking about it though. Is a rebuild slash reset a situation where Gorman and Walker were with the big league club all year last year?
Um, yeah, probably.
Yes, agreed. Agreed with that. I
Um,
mean, I feel like I don't think there's the knee jerk. I think there's the development aspect of it, and that's kind of how I looked at it. And I'm Daniel. There's a part of me that thinks this is the best move, regardless, because I think that they may be a heck of a lot better next year than they think than people think, just because of that aspect of it. I feel like there was those two in particular. I feel like there have been others, maybe Victor Scott, a little bit,
mm,
where they've never felt like they could compete because they're always looking over their shoulder. And that's another thing that I'm curious to see how much Marmal of a role Marmal played in that,
yeah.
because I don't know if he did. And if they're doubling down on, hey, he was great in development, he's the right guy for the job, we've done him wrong, then I'm pretty confident that things could get better quicker. But I don't know, and it's one of those, I don't know how much tinker is going to happen. I don't know how much lineup movement's going to happen. But to me, a reset rebuild is you're going to accept the fact that if they don't play well and you finish under 500, it's because you did it because the development's slow, not because you're moving guys around whether you don't give them a chance.
Now, I also want to say we are a lot of us, and I've heard a lot of places and us and every place we talk about, like we Gorman and Walker play all year long, and I think for those players, yeah, but development is not just throw them in the major leagues and let them,
Yeah,
sink or swim, right? I mean, this may be a situation where, like, I think if you're talking about development last year, you don't start Victor Scott at first, right? At the beginning of the year, you don't start
yeah,
him in
yeah,
the
yeah,
big
yeah.
league.
Agreed.
You leave him down. It's like we'll take our lumps with Michael Ciani, which turned out to be, fine. But I
Yeah,
would have started the year saying we'll take our lumps if we lose games or whatever. He needs to be. We don't need to mess with his development by bringing him up too early, and that's what I worry about a little bit on the pitching side of things when you know, most likely Lynn and Gibson are gone. If you do wind up trading Sonny Gray, are you going to wind up with a situation where you run the risk of rushing somebody up? Now, I do hope that with a little bit different mindset with Heimblum running the show, that there and the idea that they've kind of cushioned the fan base to say, hey, this isn't going to work. We may not win as many games as next year. That they won't feel like, okay, Quinn Matthews has to start the season in the rotation.
Yeah,
That they'll let him, develop on his own time. And if he looks ready in May, great. If he looks ready in July, great. If he doesn't make it up next year, which would be, surprising, but if that's best for his development, then you leave him down there and you don't worry about what happens at the major league level.
sure.
So I think that's the only caveat. Now for guys with like Gorman and Walker who have had the major league experience and they've, had success at the major leagues. And I think you have to just, you throw them out there and you say, you're going to play, 5 times a week, 6 times a week, whatever the case may be, you're pretty much our everyday guy. Get out there, show us what you can do and don't worry about it. We'll talk at the end of the year or something like that, and I think that's going to be interesting because I don't, is there, what went wrong for Jordan Walker last year? Can Nolan Gorman find consistency? I mean, I think those are things that I don't know if just extra playing time fixes, right? I
Sure.
don't know. And I think those are the biggest keys for next year that I can think of really is, especially if those two guys can play to the potential that we think they can, this becomes a very interesting and very exciting team. But making that click is the question.
Sure. And going through all of that, it reminds me of the body language that Mo had at the Q&A when someone asked him about Walker, because you could tell just by the way that he answered the question or took in the question, then answered it. I think they're as much of at a loss for what's going on as we are.
Mm-hmm.
That, hey, this guy can hit, he's just not elevating. And he's still chasing a little bit. Now that I feel like improves, but I think they're worried that the power's not going to be there for some of this, whose power profile could be big. Yeah, I mean that says it all, and it's one of those. That was a great point because you could go out and get a minor league center fielder to cover your tracks, not a minor league, but a low cost center fielder to cover your tracks and leave Scott down. You're right about that. I think that was a kind of a try to find lightning in a bottle type move, and I was all for it. And I love those kind of things, honestly. It's one of those that's the things that used to work well for the Cardinals. If you remember, anybody that came up would always play well because you had to meet the standard of what was going on. And I think that the standard is now, the bar is low, and I think that the expectations have superseded what's going on in the field. And I think that's what's going on organizationally, period. But you're right. I mean, when it goes back to pitching, which is ultimately the most important, it's going to be a situation of keeping your head above water right now. And I personally think that next year could be better than I think they could play to this year's level next year, even with the losses that they may take. And the sad part about it is it may have been overdue. They should have seen this a couple of years ago and said, hey, why are these guys floundering when they get here? And is it one more of a confidence boost than anything? Which I'm going to go on a limb and say that yes, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think also the Cardinals used to be a little bit more hesitant about bringing up their top prospects.
Yeah.
And so you got the guys like the Brendan Donovans or, which are good players. Don't get me wrong, but were not necessarily the highly rated ones that came up and somewhat surprised people, had a better grasp of the game and things like that. But a guy like Jordan Walker, they always, if he came up, he was ready to come up. And that, doing that twice, doing Walker last year at a spring training, even though, that didn't seem to be the right play. It was just a, hey, this sounds exciting kind of play. And then Victor Scott this year, which again, somewhat informed by Tommy Edmonds' injury, but also it was a gamble there that they shouldn't have done either. Those kind of moves kind of feel like the desperation moves. And what we've talked about this at the front office over the last 2 or 3 years has really kind of seemed like they were flailing around trying to figure out anything that would work. And I got to thinking this week. Well, I thought about it for a little while, but I was going to ask you about it. How much does the mindset of the fan base, of the front office, of how we look at the Cardinals change if in 2022 Ryan Helsley doesn't try to field that grounder in Pittsburgh and jam his finger?
Yeah,
Because if Helsley's healthy in game 1 of the playoffs that year, they win that game, right?
sure. Yeah,
And probably win that series because they were lined up pretty well for that third one. And they could have had a fairly deep run that year. I mean, you had Nolan and Arenado's MVP year, that kind of thing. What if that team got to the NLCS? Are we still talking about this even with a bad year last year? I mean, do we say, well, or in bad year in 23? Or we say, well, look, they were just, 2 wins away from the World Series, in 22. It's not that I don't know. I wonder. I think that some of the fans would be say, look, we've looked at these underlying problems for a while, but
yeah.
I think overall, and especially in the front office, it might be harder to make these things when it's only been, a brief time since you were very close to the World Series.
Yeah, that's a great question because yeah, you're right. The I don't even know what kind of percentage I want to put on this, but there's going to be a lot of people that have seen that have seen the cracks in the facade, and it may be even some of the front office people that have seen that have seen the fractures that are happening on the development side. Probably wouldn't be hard to see, but it's also the St. Louis Cardinals who pack the stadium all the time. You know what I mean? And I think
Mhm.
that has been the indicator that has moved the needle. And you're right. If it would have been an NLCS trip, yeah, they may have been bad or in 23, but it wouldn't have been the tectonic shift that we're seeing now because I still think I still think there would have been fans in the seats.
Yeah.
There is a decline, I think there's a slow decline across baseball for any reason, and it's kind of touched St. Louis. But that's a good question, one that I hadn't really thought of, where we were disappointed by the sweep of the Phillies because coming in, you're thinking, well, if you can beat Nola, you're in a good spot.
Mhm.
And I think that Nola went game 1. I couldn't remember if it was Nola or Wheeler went game 1 on that one. And then because it would have, if I'm not mistaken, would have lined up Quintana. Let's just put it this way: we felt like they were the better team in that series, and if you got by, that could be a substantial run. And yeah, you're right. It was one little thing of losing your closer who's not 100%, and and come back and beat you, and you never recover.
Yeah,
Um,
'cause the Phillies had, and I'm looking it up, but they really only had Wheeler and Nola that you worried about, and if you split
mhm.
with those, you figure that third game was some sort of matchup that you had the advantage in. So,
Yeah,
yeah, I don't know.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. You're right. I mean, that's a really good question.
and on the flip side of that, right? I mean, if you wind up 2 games away from the World Series, how does that influence what they do in the 2022-2023 off season, right? Maybe they don't quite stand as pat when you think you're just one piece away. Um, maybe 2023 doesn't turn out as bad because they get some sort of reinforcement or there's a different motivation from players and stuff like that. I mean, you never know. I mean, there's lots of different things that shift in that regard, but I don't know. I mean, I don't think we're at this spot if they get that series. And maybe they are. Maybe they go to that. I don't even remember who was next, but that the Phillies played. But maybe the Cardinals don't win in the division series or something. But still, I think some part of that is, hey, look, right now we're sitting where they haven't won a playoff game since 2020, and they might not have made the. I mean, I think they would have made the playoffs anyway with but without the expanded ones from that year. And you have to really go back to 2019 for a series win. That's a long time in St. Louis. So I wonder how much that would change things. Um, you never know. Um, so let's talk about these guys then, and I think maybe we've touched on it a little bit, and that's going to be a topic of conversation from now till something happens for them. Well, let's talk about what your odds are, and we'll start with Helsley because I think you and I both are like, it's got to be like 95% chance that they trade him this winter, right?
Oh, I would think so. And it was one of those even. That would have been the smart play, the wise move, even in a situation where you probably sneak into the playoffs.
Yeah.
Because I think your value. This is the perfect situation of the value being high, the return is going to be good, and you can get some prospects that are ready quickly. In a move like this, and it's you could even maybe get a big league roster type guy that's a big league contributor type situation in a move like this with anybody that's close. This is nothing against the player, but Luke Weaver's the closer for the Yankees right now.
Right.
You know what I mean? If Helsley's out there, that's going to garner a ton of attention. Instead of a guy that they're just like, hey, with a record of success in the bullpen over somebody that's just like, hey, let's just go with the hot hand right now. I mean, there's the value is going to be there. And 95% I think would probably be on the low end.
Yeah, I mean, I made the case back at trade deadline that
Yeah,
should have
agreed.
been in, because of the prices that quality relievers were demanding, and the fact that they really weren't. It was pretty clear they really weren't going to make that run.
And I think the only thing that talked you and I out of that is the hater in Milwaukee factor to it. But you could kind of see that coming regardless.
Yeah. And I mean, they were already, they'd already slipped out of the wild card at the trade deadline. They were 2 or 3 games out, and you just didn't see this team, I don't think, without some sort of, real reinforcement, making that push. Now, when they got Fetty and Pham and that kind of felt like, well, okay, maybe they are, but even so, you just didn't see this team going real deep. And, but yeah, I don't think you can wait. There's some idea of, well, the other option is to trade him at the deadline next year when you can maybe, maximize it because, you've only got a couple of teams, but you don't know who's going to be competitive.
Yeah.
And you don't know what kind of season Helsley's going to have. And given his history, you don't know how healthy he's going to be. I don't think you can take a risk by holding on to him and thinking maybe you could trade him later. I think you have to move him this winter.
Agreed. I mean, that's the way too many risks to hold on to at the deadline for a closer. Just and just the how this the position. I mean, how many closers do you see that are lights out for 1 year, terrible the next, and regroup? Right. I mean, Kimbrel's made a career out of that.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that's too risky to hold on. I think that it's almost a lock to move this offseason.
Yeah, and Helsley's older than we think he is, isn't he? I can't remember exactly. For some reason, I was thinking he was. Let me see if I can find how old he is. But, I think that, he's not. Let's see. Come on, computer. Yeah, he's 30, which is about what I was thinking, 29. So he's 30, and that's kind of old for a guy like that, right? I mean, sure. And that may, and then again, we're talking about the downsides of Helsley, and there's not many because he's very good, but the other teams are going to look at that too. But I still think you can, somebody's going to say, look, I'm going to take that game. I need, he's in the prime. I'm a team that's, we need this closer to get into, and a guy like that's a really good asset even if you just use him in the postseason. To have that lockdown guy in October is huge. So, I think he's the one that he's really the only thing on this roster, I think, that has a lot of value, right? I think there's other people that could get traded, but I just don't know how much they bring back.
Yeah. That's they're probably going to look at several different avenues like we've discussed on this, but this is the one. I mean, this is to move Arenado. Probably, knocking on the Hall of Fame door. That's going to be, it's going to take as much creativity to move him out as that you had to move him in, and that's going to be tough. Say the same with Gray, with Michaelis and all those guys. But this is one of those moves that's fairly easy, and that's, dangle to a contender, get through the stuff. All the pluses and minuses, and then make the move. This is the one that makes the most sense, and it would probably be the easiest to accomplish. Everything else comes with kind of a little bit of baggage, kind of a little bit of a money eat. And I mean, I don't think you and I are both convinced that they're going to do that a lot. Even where I think that it may be beneficial for them to do it, I don't know if they're going to do it. But yeah, you're right. I mean, this is the one that makes the most sense, and it's. Will Helsley still be a Cardinal by? I think this will be their big winter meeting move.
So you think, let's say, by December 15th he's gone?
I would think so.
Okay. I don't disagree with that. I think that's probably is the first move. And it may be the move that, although they're probably talking with these players too, but it may be a move that, okay, they trade Helsley. Then it's like Contreras is like, well, maybe I do want him. Maybe this is a different situation than I thought it was going to be. Although you'd think these players, one, would understand this. I mean, I imagine Ryan Helsley figuratively has his bags packed, right? I mean, he understands the situation as well. But sometimes when the ground changes, other people want to get out too. Well, you mentioned Nolan. Let's go there next. What are you going to put the odds of him being traded at?
And I'm sorry, you did which one first?
No, Nolan.
Okay. Gosh. I'm so torn on this one just because I think that there's so many moving pieces and it's a white flag move. It'll be up to him. But I don't. I want to say maybe not. I don't know. I'm going to go with the 65% chance he's moved.
Really? Because that's way higher than I would have picked.
Yeah. Here's if you want to know exactly where I'm thinking about this, Kike Hernandez made the last out at third base last night for the Dodgers.
Okay.
And the Dodgers can take somebody on like that, and they're the perfect fit. And he could also star there. I'm not saying that that's necessarily the move, but I do feel like it would be a West Coast move if it does happen. I think it's a disservice to Nolan and to the Cardinals if they don't consider something like this, knowing that you have some options that can possibly play third base behind him. Do I want to see it done? I don't. I honestly hope that they keep Contreras, Gray, and Arenado. But for some reason, I about went in the 70s on this one. But for some reason, I think this is a move that does get made.
I see. I was going to go like 25%, because I think one, the money and the money from Colorado, the money the Cardinals would have to put in, the no trade clause. I think Nolan made a point to come to St. Louis. I mean, maybe that's changed, but even at that time, he probably could have gone to Los Angeles. I agree. The Dodgers are probably the only other place that he would go, but and I also think the Cardinals have made a big deal about talking about how they've had a Hall of Fame player on their roster every year since 1902 or something like that. I mean, literally that far back. And Nolan Arenado is the best chance for that on this team, unless Mason Wynn becomes huge. I think that they still need somebody that appeals, to the casual fan, that has that name recognition. I think Nolan. I'm guessing Nolan wants to stay. I might be wrong. Now, if he wants to leave, then I think they'll accommodate him as best they can. But I think just all that factors in, and I think the fact that he's gonna, he's got 4 or 5 years. There's still a really good chance he can win in St. Louis, and I think that would be a draw for him. The idea that, hey, I'm going to be the one. I'm going to be part of the team that comes out of the wilderness here in a baseball town that's going to go absolutely crazy if they do get into the World Series. Because playing for the Dodgers. I mean, yes, I'm sure that fan base is always excited, but it's different, I would think. I mean, than winning it in St. Louis, just because of the way the towns are set up to some degree. But so that's why I'm thinking. I'm thinking he probably stays. I think the Cardinals would like to hold on. And if you trade Nolan along with everybody else, you really do have a little harder time saying it's not a, tear down.
Well, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. I
No,
was
that's
going to
about
go
it.
to that point too.
Yeah, that's fine. No, that's all I had to say.
Well, that is where I'm kind of leaning with this is the mistrust in what we were and what's being reported.
Mm-hmm.
That could be, the moving out of the Stars, moving the Stars out, and doing it as Mo leaving the building as well before Bloom takes over and is not the bad guy in day one.
Mm-hmm.
There's an element to me that feels like that may be what happens. I do not want that to be what happens because,
Right.
well, and this is another thing too. This may be the overly optimistic view. I think keeping those three, being Gray, Contreras, Arenado, and then playing the youth, I don't know if you look or achieve much less than what you did this year.
Oh, no. Yeah. Yeah, I was talking to somebody. I was at the homecoming parade yesterday, and I was a friend of mine that he's a Mets fan, but we were talking about the teams, and I said, look, this team has a decent chance of winning, 83 games, 82 games like they did this year, next year, even if they do sell off some parts. If the young players take the steps that we think that they're going to. Now we've thought that they were going to take it for another year or two, so who knows? But I agree. If you keep those three, especially, you're around 500 team, right? You're between 78 and 82 wins, probably. Should be. And maybe more if you get some, you get a bounce back from a couple people. So, yeah, I agree. I just don't know. And I think if that's the case, that's where you get into that reset being a
Sure.
legitimate. It's like, okay, we're going to change our philosophy, but we're not necessarily changing our roster a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. And that may be how they do it. I don't know. So let's hit some of the other ones though. Well, since we're, because we know what we want, but that doesn't mean that's what we actually are going to get.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go to Contreras then. What are your chances? What do you think the chances are he gets moved?
Probably that's another one where I think that I don't know how much in my heart and my head I'm talking about this one.
Yeah.
Because they have two guys and Herrera's going to play, unless they can move him. And I don't know if that goes against a reset type mentality. I'm going to go 40% chance that he's moved.
Okay.
And that's kind of playing it safe, hoping that he doesn't. These short-term contract moves out, I think you just look terrible when you move them out. And I don't know if he's been given a fair chance here, which I think last year he was their best player, even with two stints on the DL. So I'm gonna stick with 40. I think that it's going to be entertained, but I don't necessarily think it's going to happen.
Yeah, that's reasonable. I was thinking 50-50, but I could probably lean toward that too. I think the only reason I think that they would do that is because this catcher jam backlog is going to have to be fixed somehow.
Yes, I agree.
And if that's Herrera getting traded, if that's because again, not only do you have the three on the roster, you've got Jimmy Crooks coming fairly quickly, a couple others in the pipeline as well. Now, again, if you wanted to trade a Herrera, you're going to get a lot. That's another one like Helsley that should get you some significant value back.
Agreed.
But if that's the way they want to go, I don't know. But and again, it becomes up to the player. But Contreras had such a desire to be here, and I do think there's probably a bit of a unfinished business in his mind because of how the last 2 years have gone. That being said, depending on how much he holds that whole, we're going to not catch you and put you in the outfield type of thing from 2023 in his head, he may be looking for an option out too. So I don't know.
Yeah.
But, I think that's kind of in line with what I would say. Sonny Gray.
Until I honestly thought his chances of being traded were about 20 to 25% until you explain what you explained. And it's one of those that I was like, that is a move that makes a lot of sense now, that hey, we're buckled down for 2 years to maybe take some losses, but we're going to figure out what we have going here, and which may mean you do not fit in the plans, but they're not telling him that. I'm going to stay about 35-40% still, because there's a part to me that thinks, I feel like this with Arenado as well, by the way, that I feel like they think some of this is on them, and they want to, and they kind of want to, they want a little retribution. And I think that the blood in the water maybe for them is, we may be a hell of a lot better next year than people think we're going to be. And I think that may be a motivating factor with Gray and with Arenado, honestly.
Yeah, I'm kind of in that same range with Gray. I also think, I just think you got to have somebody that can win ball games, right? And if they trade Gray, that rotation is so weak that you can't even. I don't think you can do anything but sell optimism and future value.
Sure.
Come watch guys develop. But I think you keep Gray, and that keeps you from having to promote somebody too early. Again, if he wants to go, they'll trade him, but I think their preference would be to keep him. So yeah, I'm in that 30, 35, 40% range too.
Yeah, it's one of those 30% now. If you have a first half like you did in 23, 75% at the deadline, situation, that's how I would approach it.
Yeah, I think that's the safest thing too, because again, maybe a situation where it gets bad and Sonny Gray comes to you in the middle of the season and says, I've changed my mind, let's get out of here.
Yeah.
And a deadline deal is a good chance for that kind of thing as well. But I don't know. What do you think about Steven Matz?
Man, I love that move coming in, but and I was hoping it would work out. What are the while being lazy? What are his parameters left on that contract?
He's got 1 year left. Hang on, I actually have contracts up here, so let me scroll down. I think it's like 12 to 15 million for next year. Okay, I must have gone past it because I'm down too far. I was getting down in the Mason Wynn area. That's not right. There it is. Okay. Yeah, $12 million for 25. He's got some performance bonuses and stuff like that, but so that's 12 million is fairly reasonable, right? That's what they paid Lynn and Gibson basically this year.
Yeah, very true. I mean, I want to say the low hanging fruit is to hey, let's make a move. You can find a suitor somewhere. Mm-hmm. He also kind of falls into that bucket of, we have to have somebody that can start without promoting someone too early. I don't know if they even think that he's a starter anymore. Heck, I don't know what to think of Matz, honestly. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I would think if you feel like he had starting value, I feel like you have a probably 25-30% chance to trade him. If you don't, I mean, it's probably 65-75% chance you trade him. And honestly, I just don't know the answer to that, because I don't even know if they know the answer to that yet, because he hasn't been what he's lived up to. He's pitched well at times. He's pitched poor at times. And, it's one of those that I thought that was also a low-hanging fruit move that they did make when they signed him, because you could kind of draw the line between them that, hey, this is one of those where he's not going to be a top-tier guy. He's going to be a second-tier guy, and you can get him pretty quickly and all that, and it just didn't work out, which may be, the more I say that may be the biggest issue that we're facing right now with both of them, or with the organization, that they've done these second-tier moves, and it's bit them. And that's why they're contractually in a bad spot. With you hear the stories that they do spend money, they just don't spend smart money, and I would think Matz fits into that right now. So I don't know. I mean, after what we've talked about throughout the show of, hey, you're going to have somebody that can take the ball without throwing these kids out, basically throwing out dinner to the Wolves or dinner to the Lions, essentially, you're going to have guys that can take these innings. So that's one to me. It would not surprise me to see him pitching somewhere else, but also I could see him being in that rotation, considering that I don't think they bring back. I would love to say that they weren't going to bring back any of the three of Lynn, Gibson, and Michaelis, but like you and I talked about, Michaelis may be a hard move, and you still may need Matz in that rotation.
I'm thinking I'm going to give it about a 60% chance they trade Matz. I think that, being a lefty, there's probably a market out there, especially for $12 million. And I think if you can get out from under that, I mean, and maybe you have to pay a little bit of it, but I think the idea of not having him to rely on, I guess, you know what I'm saying? You kind of have to plan for him if he's on your roster, but you also got to realize that he's probably not going to be there all year long. I think maybe getting away from that is there some value there, right? And let somebody else take on that idea. Let the Dodgers take him for, put him on their DL all the time and,
Mm-hmm.
all that kind of stuff. I think that, and I just don't think that they might put him in the rotation. I would say that a rotation next year of Gray, Palante, Matz, Michaelis, and whatever doesn't really excite anybody. But I think if they can find a taker, they'll trade him.
And that may be an easy move, as in like the return doesn't mean a lot type of situation. Right.
Yeah, but I think that, again, you look last year, they said, I saw out to this week that the qualifying offer is, I think, $21 million this year. If you can get a Matz for 12, somebody that could put him in the back of a rotation or needs somebody to be there while they've got, a prospect that's going to need a couple more months or something like that. There could be, some value there. I mean, you're probably still not getting a whole lot back for him, but you might be able to trade him without having to pay for anything either. And, it's not an onerous contract. So, I would say 60%. And that does bring us to Michaelis, and I mean, I don't want to say there's a 0% chance that he's traded, but I gotta feel like it's really close because I just can't imagine, one, who would want him, two, how much the Cardinals would have to pay to have him traded.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. From someone who's historically a fan of Michaelis and liked what he brought, I feel like that's one of those that we were talking about. Sometimes you need to make some changes just to make some changes, and that may be one to me. Especially if you're going to try to get McGreevy and Graceffo up here, you have Matthews coming quickly. You hope that Hintz even in a situation where you're that you're promoting guys too quickly, I feel like this is a move they almost have to make. And for Michaelis he's been great for the Cardinals. He was bad last year. I feel like this is a cut your losses type situation.
Yeah. I would like to think that. I mean, I can't imagine them just flat out waiving him, especially with the contract. The contract is not terrible, but it's it's $16 million, so it's a little bit more than Matt's. It was front loaded a bit, so but it's also an amount that I don't know that they just want to just eat.
I know it.
So especially with all the uncertainties around revenues, so I don't know. Then again, if you eat it and you pay a league minimum salary to somebody, then you're really only, there's not that much difference, right?
Yeah.
So it's, it's one thing if you have to eat it and they go out and buy another $10 million starter or something of that nature. Do you think there's any chance that they exercise the option on Gibson with the idea of trading him either this winter or at the deadline?
Do you so that would put you in, if you exercised it, you'd go Michaelis, Fetty, Gibson, Palante for certain, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
That I think Palante is in the rotation. I think he pitched.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
proved his point.
Yeah.
Oh man, then that leaves that one spot open. That's going to be the tryout, so to speak, with some of the younger guys. Here's my thing: I would be 100% in with a Gibson or a Lynn if you didn't have Michaelis.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, and I think you and I were on record of saying that. Oh, you could at most bring back one of Michaelis, Gibson, and Lynn, and I would prefer the latter two over Michaelis.
Yeah.
May not answer your question, but I think that the Michaelis contract, whatever they decide to do with that, is completely contingent on what they do with Gibson.
I was looking at Jeff Jones's article today, and he talked about the fact that how basically Andre Palante may be the only person that is guaranteed a spot for next year.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting, and because he referenced it in the article, is something I had not thought of. But could you see them flip Fetty? A guy at $7.5 million, a guy that has had significant success this year. I mean, it would seem like you're not going to get back, although they didn't give up much for him.
Exactly.
So maybe they would, but you're still not going to get just this huge return back. But there's probably some value there, and he doesn't have a no trade clause, so is that something that I mean, again, on the flip side of that, he's cheap and invaluable to there, and especially if you wind up trading Gray, you would probably need him.
Yeah.
But I hadn't really thought about that, but that does make some sense.
Sure. Well, and it's funny. I didn't even bring up Gray in the
Yeah.
rotation picture just a second ago, which kind of makes you think. I mean, is Fetty in that group of? Is he the fourth member of that group of Gibson, Lynn, Michaelis, Fetty, where you probably only take one of them, and you have value with a potential trade of Fetty. You know what you get in Gibson, and I think you're disappointed in what Fetty brought over. Not that makes much difference in what they're doing now anyway. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that makes sense. I don't know if it goes that as Jeff's talking about is that severe of a complete clean out. And I think you made a pretty good point as to why, because what happens on the road, what happens with the pitching next year is probably going to dictate how good they are regardless.
Yeah.
And if you're going to do a complete clean out, that I don't know how much sense that completely makes, because I don't know that, to me, that's more detrimental to the young guys than it is as a positive.
Yeah, and then we, again, we made some fun of this veteran leadership thing this winter because that's all they seem to go get, right? They got a whole lot of guys that weren't necessarily good, but had veteran leadership. But we also saw that there was some value to that this year as well. I mean, we saw Matt Carpenter helping Alec Burleson. We heard about Lance Lynn and helping, I think, Palante. And you just need some of that.
Yeah.
I'm
a big believer in those intangibles, by the way. So I may not be the best person to answer this, because I think that when people poo on that right away, I think it's just that I think that's the analytical look and not realizing that, we're dealing with people here.
True. But also, I think there should be able to find some veteran leadership that can actually hit the ball too.
Agreed. No, I agree with that. Agreed.
And and the Brandon Crawford thing just seemed a little bit weird. But yeah, I think that they've got to have some, and that's another reason. I don't know that they trade Nolan Arenado. I don't know that they trade Contreras or Gray or people like that, because you can't have. I think we saw, we've seen Cincinnati somewhat, right? We wondered about how Cincinnati was going to do with all this young talent and no Joey Votto or anybody that to kind of shepherd them, and it didn't work for them, right? I mean, they didn't do what you would expect them to do, and I think that's probably why they went out and got Terry Francona as the manager, is to kind of help give. I know, well, you can't do it all from the coaching spot. We talked about that last year. That doesn't hurt, right? To have that different mindset, and maybe you get another veteran guy or two in there that helps those young guys, and then they become a threat. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's good. It's difficult finding that balance. And we'll see how they do it this year. But yeah, I mean, they've got to have somebody in that rotation that has pitched more than, one season.
Yeah, I mean and you're right, because a lot of the times that those moves are made, it seems to blow up in your face more than it does, But yeah, they're blocking guys that need to throw, and that's I don't know. I mean, I have a wish list of what I would like to see happen. I'm just not completely convinced what it is, and it starts with Michaelis finding another place to pitch, and this comes from a guy who's historically a fan of what he brings. And they could easily talk themselves into, hey, he'll be much better with this with a better defense. But you know what I mean? I think that theory was kind of blown up last year, that they're hitting the ball hard on him and hitting it in the air.
I do think that the Cardinals, more than anything about who they bring in, like this winter and stuff, have to be willing to be more aggressive in letting people go when minor league people are ready. Like if Quinn
Yes.
Matthews is ready in May, if it looks like he's really ready in May, you find a spot for him. You don't just let him sit there till June or July because you've got Miles Michaelis making, $16 million. You cut Miles Michaelis and let Quinn Matthews play it. I mean, I think they're going to have to be more aggressive in that regard. I mean, I don't necessarily, like I said, I don't want them bringing people up before it's time, like we talked with Walker and Scott. But we have seen, we saw Alec Burleson just destroying, AAA for quite some time before he had a chance to ever make the major leagues. All the way back to Randy Arozarena, who was tearing it up, never got a chance in St. Louis until very late into that. I think they've got to be really, and that's in the valuation, that's in the development. That's the idea of, okay, this isn't just a hot streak. This guy's got it figured out. He's ready for the next level, and they've got to make those adjustments. They've got to make those decisions, and be wise about them and say, yes, okay, this is real. Let's move him. But when that's real, they need to move him. And I don't think they've always done that.
Yeah, no, agreed. I mean, I think they've always been ultra conservative on how they've done those things, almost to a detriment now, and it's, you're right. I mean, I'm excited for spring just to see that. I hope someone can Michael Walker this spring to where they say they pitch so well that your decision's made for you, and then you decide to move forward with those things. And I feel like that's kind of been lost on them, but no one's really pushed the issue either. And I think that's the bigger development question to me, is who's going to be that next guy to be like, hey, I want to fit into this, and I'm going to pitch to where I can do it, and that's one of the reasons I'm kind of excited to see how the roster plays out starting in January.
And I mean, to go with that point, but to maybe elaborate with it, remember, Michael Walker had a good spring, but then, he didn't get called up till like May or something. And I think that's important too. I think because what we've seen the last couple of years is sometimes they get a little too excited about 3 weeks of against minor leaguers type of results, right? And try to grab somebody up a little bit earlier than they need to be. But you got to get on the radar, and that's how you do it. And,
sure.
If Quinn Matthews comes out and has a really strong spring, I still hope he goes to Memphis. But I hope he has a good 2 months and then he's in St. Louis.
Sure.
So, and I think, and I hope Kyle is able to, and others, Kyle, Blake, Kareem, all those guys are really able to kind of show us over this next year how decisions are different.
Yeah.
How, this is what they would have done in the past, but this is what they're doing now. This is how you can see the Heimblum effect, if you will. Because we don't always know that, right? I mean, we just see a guy get promoted.
Exactly. And if those things are not, if those things aren't publicized and talked about and all those, there's going to be a lot of hesitation that things haven't changed at all. Right. And that's and ownership has done that to themselves. So I hope that there is a lot of reporting and a lot of stuff that's being brought up of, hey, this is how things have changed, and this is like you said, this is how business used to be handled. And I hope that those things are brought out to the light, because if not, it's going to look exactly the same.
Yeah. Yep. I think so. All right. Well, we've gone long enough for something that we didn't know if we would actually have much to talk about. So we will be with you sometime, probably next week. But, again, if there's not much going on, there may be weeks where we just don't jump in, especially until the playoffs are done. But I do want to, stick around here. Last week we had our first, I don't know what we're going to call it. I called it History Harkback in the write up last time. I don't know that I like that name, but if you've got an idea, let me know. But we've got another one. Remembers has come back with another moment of Cardinal history. So stick around for that after we wrap here. And we appreciate him, continuing to bring us the knowledge of the Cardinal history. But until next time, for Alan, I'm Daniel. Good night.
Good night.
Hi, and thanks for having me back, guys. Today, I'd like to look back at Game 7 of the 1967 World Series between the Cardinals and Red Sox. Now, you would think that the last thing anyone would want to do before facing Bob Gibson is make him angry, but that's exactly what the Red Sox did heading into Game 7. The matchup pitted Jim Lonborg, the Red Sox 6'5" ace, against Gibson, who had already been dominant in his 2 earlier starts in the series. Nonetheless, Red Sox first baseman George Scott predicted that Gibson wouldn't survive 5 innings in Game 7. Furthermore, when asked who would pitch the decisive game, Boston manager Dick Williams had replied, Lonborg and Champagne, a quip that dominated the front page of the Boston Record American the day of Game 7. If anything, though, Gibson may have been even angrier with Boston's hospitality industry. First, the Cardinals team hotel wouldn't turn on the air conditioning the night before the game. The next morning, when Gibson, Tim McCarver, Dow Maxfield, and their wives went downstairs for a pregame breakfast, everyone received their food except Gibson. After 45 minutes and several complaints, Gibson received a single piece of burnt toast. When he asked the waitress to take it away, she replied, "We'll take you away." With no breakfast coming, Gibson was forced to hop on the team bus on an empty stomach. When St. Louis Post-Dispatch sports editor Bob Bragg learned of Gibson's situation, he hopped off the bus at a red light and caught a cab to a local diner. He ordered 2 ham and cheese sandwiches and brought them to the clubhouse, where Gibson ate one and saved the other for later. If Boston was trying to wear Gibson out ahead of the game, they were doing much the same to Lonborg, who had already won games 2 and 5 and was pitching on just 2 days rest. Unfortunately for the 25-year-old, his fatigue was obvious. Curt Flood gave the Cardinals a 2-0 lead in the 3rd inning when he hit an RBI single and later scored on a wild pitch. In the 5th, Gibson hit a solo home run, and Roger Maris added a sacrifice fly. Julian Javier broke the game open in the 6th with a 3-run homer that gave St. Louis a 7-1 lead. From there, the game was entirely in Gibson's capable hands. Over 9 innings, Gibson allowed just 3 hits while striking out 10. Fittingly, he finished the game by striking out George Scott, whose prediction that Gibson wouldn't make it out of the 5th inning proved wildly inaccurate. With the win, Gibson not only clinched the Cardinals' 8th World Series title, but he became just the 7th pitcher to earn 3 wins in a World Series. Not bad for a guy who had missed 8 weeks earlier in the season when a Roberto Clemente line drive broke his leg. After the game, Flood told reporters that they shouldn't be fooled. The leg was still bothering Gibson. "Gibson's got some kind of vicious desire, hasn't he?" said Tim McCarver. "Tenacious, that's what he is, tenacious. He pitches on guts. He challenges anybody. He'd challenge Michael the Archangel if he had to." Gibson wasn't the only star of the World Series. Roger Maris finished the series with 7 RBIs, setting a new team World Series record. Lou Brock's 7 stolen bases broke a record set in 1909, and his 8 runs scored tied an MLB record held by Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig. The only thing he might go back to Boston for is some of those wonderful lobsters, Cardinals manager Red Shaney said. He's stolen everything else in Boston. Now humble in defeat, Red Sox manager Dick Williams had an easy explanation for his team's 2nd-place finish. "Too much Gibson and Brock," he said. So that's a quick look back at Game 7 of the 1967 World Series. For more Cardinals history, visit stlredbirds.com or follow me on Twitter at Remembirds, REMEMBIRDS. Thanks again, and go Cards.
Tying run at second base. In the air to right center. This game is tied. Going to 3rd is Pujols, and it's 9-9. They just won't go away.